The year 1932. In Norway's Svalbard archipelago, a small wooden hut stood between the sea and the ice, and inside a 21-year-old Norwegian girl, Ingrid Halvorsen, was sitting alone. Outside, the temperature had dropped to around -30 degrees. The wind was blowing at a speed of approximately 60 kilometers per hour, and the sun had not been seen in the sky for the past several weeks because the polar night had begun. Inside the hut, only the tick-tock of an old hanging clock and the sound of her breathing could be heard. It had been 4 years now since she had been stranded on this island, and the most terrifying thing was that mainland Norway thought she had already been rescued 3 years ago. On the last page of her diary, it was written, "If anyone is reading this, it means I either survived or the sea has kept me for itself." But the story begins several years before that, when Ingrid first set out from Longyearbyen, about 180 kilometers north, with a research supply ship. She had absolutely no idea that the Arctic ice was about to cut her off from the world. The story starts in the summer of June 1928, when the ice in Svalbard melts a little and small supply ships are able to come deep through the fjords. Ingrid Halvorsen, who was a resident of Tromsø, had joined a seasonal supply mission because her father was a trapper and worked to deliver rations to Arctic outposts. Their small ship, Jordan, moved ahead about 180 kilometers north from Longyearbyen, and the weather appeared clear. But in the Arctic, the weather often changes within a few hours. There were a total of 7 people on the ship, whose job was to deliver winter supplies to a remote trapping hut located on a small, deserted island near Nordøslandet. The height of that hut was about 25 meters above sea level, so that the storm surge would not come directly inside. In the beginning, everything was normal. The sea was calm and the air was cold but stable. But on the 3rd day, the mist began to thicken on the horizon. The temperature suddenly dropped, and the pressure began to go down rapidly. In the Arctic, this is often a sign of an approaching storm. The captain considered turning back, but by then it was too late. The storm didn't come suddenly. Rather, the surface of the sea began to change slowly, as if the water had become heavy. The direction of the wind turned from the southwest toward the north, and its speed increased from about 20 kilometers per hour to approximately 70 kilometers per hour within just a few hours. In the Arctic, a drop in pressure often means a fast cyclonic system, and the ship's compass was repeatedly jolting slightly because magnetic variation is felt more at this latitude. Visibility rapidly decreased to only 50 meters, and the captain tried to drop the anchor so the ship wouldn't drift, but the sea floor below was uneven, and the chain couldn't get a full grip. During this time, a large wave pushed the ship toward the icy rocks of the shore. The lower rear part collided forcefully, and the engine shut down. The crew decided on an emergency evacuation because water had started filling the ship. Ingrid was sent with the first group in an inflatable raft so they could reach the nearby island, which was about 2 kilometers away. But Arctic currents do not flow in a straight line, and within a few minutes, the raft was pulled in a different direction from the plan. The raft kept bouncing on the icy waves, and the wind was now blowing at a speed of about 80 kilometers per hour, making it almost impossible to control the direction. Ingrid looked back to catch a final glimpse of the ship, but the mist and flying snow swallowed it within a few seconds. Arctic currents often flow in a different direction from the surface, and instead of going straight toward the nearby island, the raft was swept away at an angle. After about 15 minutes they saw land, but it was not the island with the planned hut. Instead, it was a small, rocky, and deserted island, whose length would have been hardly 800 meters and width around 300 meters. The waves crashed the raft against the shore, and Ingrid somehow climbed up by grabbing onto the rocks. The rest of the crew was left somewhere behind in the mist, and visibility was so low that nothing was clearly visible, even 50 meters away. Particles of ice in the wind were pricking her face. The temperature had dropped to -15 degrees, and the sound of the sea was constantly echoing. When Ingrid looked back, she saw only white mist, and at that very moment, she realized she was left alone. Ingrid first tried to reach a high place away from the water, because getting wet in the Arctic is more dangerous than the cold. And with the wind, the body's heat loss increases manifold. The surface of the island was mostly rocky. In between, there was frozen ice, and about 20 to 25 meters above sea level, a small wooden hut was visible. Perhaps it was a shelter left by some old trapper. She reached there by climbing slowly. The door was half broken, but there was a dry place inside. Some old oil drums, a rusted stove, and a rusted lantern hanging on the wall were still present. Arctic trapping huts were often left for emergency use, so that any stranded person could survive for some time. She took off her wet clothes and looked for dry blankets because hypothermia drops the body temperature below 35 degrees, and within a few minutes, a person can become unconscious. Outside, the wind was constantly pushing against the door as if the whole island was shaking. For the first time, Ingrid thought calmly. Rescue would perhaps arrive in a few hours, but she did not know that the distress signal sent from the ship was incomplete, and the mainland search team was about to start the search in the wrong direction. On the first night, Ingrid spent her time inside the hut sitting near the stove, because the night in the Arctic brings not just darkness, but also a constantly falling temperature that can reach -20 degrees within a few hours. She took some fuel from an oil drum and carefully lit a fire, because too much smoke in a closed space can create carbon monoxide, which can make a person unconscious without any sound. The wooden walls of the hut kept creaking with the wind, and icy particles constantly struck the door from the outside. Even when morning came, the sun did not fully rise. Only a faint blue light was visible, because days become short and weak after the Arctic summer ends. Ingrid conducted her first survey of the island. Its length was about 800 meters, and the highest rock was nearly 40 meters high. From where the surrounding sea could be seen far into the distance, she decided to collect driftwood to make a signal fire, so that a ship or aircraft could see the smoke from afar. However, the wind was blowing from the north to the south, and the smoke was spreading toward the open sea, not toward the mainland. Days passed slowly, and the Arctic weather changed every few hours, sometimes light sunshine, sometimes a sudden icy wind that would strip the body of its heat in minutes. Ingrid quickly realized that the greatest enemy here was not hunger, but the cold and loneliness. She built a small wind barrier of stones around the hut so that the heat from the stove would not escape quickly, and she made a small wooden rack above the ground to keep the driftwood dry, because wet wood gives more smoke and less heat when burning. At the edge of the island, she found a seabird colony from which she collected eggs, which has been a common survival source for Arctic trappers, because they are high in fat and provide energy in the cold. But every time, climbing the rocks was risky, because slipping on thin ice meant the danger of falling straight into the sea, and with the water temperature being around 0 degrees, the body could stop functioning within a few minutes. In the evening, she saw a shadow like a ship far on the horizon. For a few seconds, her heart began to beat fast, but the mist slowly swallowed it, and the first false hope ended. After a few weeks, Ingrid realized that rescue was not coming immediately, and survival now meant creating a routine rather than just waiting. In the Arctic, saving energy is most important, so she spent her days. She divided her time into parts, finding driftwood in the morning, taking eggs from the seabird colony in the afternoon, and repairing the inside of the hut in the evening so that less air could get in. However, the temperature had now started falling to -25 degrees, and the wind speed would often reach 90 kilometers per hour, making it difficult to stay outside for more than a few minutes. She built a small snow wall with stones near the hut, because snow acts like insulation to block the wind. The polar night was also gradually approaching, that time when the sun does not rise above the horizon for several weeks, and a person's sense of time begins to break down. She started counting the days by making marks on the wall with wood. 1, 2, 3, but after a few months, the marks became so many that it became difficult even to count them. One night, a sound like heavy footsteps came from outside, and fresh paw prints appeared near the door. A polar bear had reached the island. The polar bear's paw prints were clearly visible all around the hut, and Ingrid understood that the danger was no longer just the weather. In Svalbard, polar bears outnumber humans, and when hungry, they may even try to break down wooden walls. She immediately placed heavy oil drums and stones inside the door so that if the bear pushed, the door wouldn't open directly. In the Arctic, bears are often attracted by scent, so she stopped throwing food scraps outside and began throwing eggshells far away on the seashore. The sound of heavy footsteps continued outside all night, sometimes the faint sound of scratching the wall, sometimes a low sound like breathing, and every sound felt many times more terrifying sitting inside the confined hut. She dimmed the stove's flame because too much light could attract the bear further. After several hours, the sound stopped, but she couldn't sleep until morning. The polar night had now fully begun. The temperature was around -30 degrees, and there was complete darkness outside, the kind of darkness in which the sense of time is lost. She made a new mark on the wall. It was perhaps her 100th day on the island, or even more. In the months of the polar night, time seemed to have stopped, and Ingrid quickly realized that survival is now not just a matter of finding food, but also a game of keeping the mind stable. There was constant darkness outside. The temperature would drop to -35 degrees on many nights, and the wind would shake the walls of the hut as if someone were pushing from the outside. She kept the lamp's flame low so that the fuel would last for a long time, and on the wall, she kept counting the days by making small marks. However, after some time, she herself lost confidence in whether the count was correct or not. During the long periods of darkness in the Arctic, a person's circadian rhythm breaks down, and often the body cannot feel the difference between day and night, which can lead to fatigue and hallucinations. One night, she felt as if the sound of an engine was coming from afar. She immediately ran outside, but it was only the echo of the wind hitting the rocks, creating that sound. False hope had now become her greatest enemy. Despite this, she did not stop collecting driftwood for a signal fire, because she was convinced that one day a real ship would appear on the horizon. It took several months for the polar night to end, and when faint sunlight finally returned to the horizon, Ingrid realized she had been on the island for nearly a year. The pages of her diary began to curl from the moisture, and the marks made on the wall were so full that she had to choose a new spot. During the short summer months, the temperature would rise slightly above 0 degrees. The ice would melt and small freshwater puddles would form, which she drank after filtering through a clean cloth. This was because drinking salt water in the Arctic accelerates dehydration. She tried seal hunting, but without a proper rifle. It was nearly impossible, therefore, she remained dependent on seabirds and driftwood. In the second year, she reinforced the roof of the hut because wind speeds in winter storms would often reach 100 kilometers per hour. By the third year, her clothes had become a patchwork, and the skin on her hands had cracked from the cold. In mainland Norway, the search operation had been closed in the first year because she had been marked as rescued in the records. She did not know that her biggest fight was no longer with the sea or the bear, but with a mistake in the system. In the summer of the fourth year, when the ice began to melt again, and the sun stayed above the horizon for many hours, Ingrid decided to build a new signal on the island's highest rock. Using driftwood, stones, and burnt coal, she made a mark nearly 15 meters long on the ground, so that a passing aircraft could recognize it, as smoke often blows toward the sea in strong winds and is not visible from a distance. At that same time, a Norwegian survey aircraft was performing routine mapping north of Svalbard, and the pilot's eyes fell upon that unusual pattern which did not look natural. The aircraft performed a low pass, and standing below, Ingrid heard the real sound of an engine for the first time in 4 years. This was not a hallucination. A few hours later, the rescue ship arrived, and when the hatch opened, the 4-year wait ended along with the cold wind. Later, the investigation revealed that the incomplete distress signal sent after the ship's accident had been logged incorrectly, and in the official system, she had been considered already rescued. Ingrid's story became an example of Arctic survival because, many times, it is not nature but a small human error that separates a person from the rest of the world.